Good morning, Minister, and
morning
to your officials. Thank you for your opening remarks. I think people who do welcome the nationalisation of Scotland's rail services do want to see improved accountability and clearer lines of responsibility. So on a point of clarification, I do welcome your intention to have good relationships with the trade unions, but I've noticed that the RMT and the press have accused you of lying, which is obviously not a good allegation to hear. And they also say that the buck stops with you, Minister. So can you explain to the committee, on that point of accountability, which is what we're here to look at today, how can the public be reassured that when things are going badly, it won't be a case of officials and managers will take responsibility, and when things are going well, ministers will take credit? How can we be sure that the lines of responsibility are clear? And how do we get to a place very quickly where trade unions that I know you respect have confidence in you and are not accusing you of lying, which is really a really unfortunate headline to see at this early stage of the project?
Well, I have read in recent days some press reports, as you may understand, and I have participated in numerous media appearances on this, Ms Lennon. I've got to say, in terms of the respectful tone between government and trade unions, the use of that word I don't find particularly respectful. I don't think it's accurate either. I spent a lot of time, as you know, at the start of my appointment with our trade union partners to try and bring them into the conversation about the future of Scotland's trains. They have to be part of this to make it a success. We're not in private ownership anymore. This is public ownership. And the government, of course, is accountable to all of Scotland, not just in terms of ScotRail trains or ScotRail holdings. Now, in terms of my accountability, I'm Transport Minister, so I accept responsibility. But at this moment in time, we have an industrial dispute, and it would not be appropriate, as it doesn't happen in any other part of government, for ministers to be in the room taking part in those negotiations. ScotRail is the employer. Now, I am absolutely committed to working with ScotRail to make sure that this works and we get to a quick resolution. I think that's what passengers want to see. I know that's what passengers want to see. I want to see it as well, I've got to say, as somebody who takes the Edinburgh to Fife line pretty much every day into Parliament. So these are challenging times, and I think it's also important to illustrate it's not just happening in Scotland. There are other parts of the GB rail network that are impacted by driver shortages at the moment as a result of industrial dispute. And of course, later today we'll hear from the ballot with regard to Network Rail and the RMT, which affects a number of train operators. So there are challenging times ahead, I recognise, for the rail network, not just in Scotland, everywhere in the UK. Now, the UK Government, for example, can take a view on how it wants to engage with the trade unions. I heard some of that in the press reported over the weekend. I am committed to working with our trade union partners in a respectful dialogue which understands that ministers cannot be in the room. But equally, I will work with ScotRail to ensure that we get to a resolution which leads us to restore services as soon as possible, taking me back to the convener's point. We must restore services to allow passengers to get to their work, to go to late-night concerts, wherever they may be in the country. And I recognise right now that passengers are scunnered. I said this yesterday. The services that they currently are experiencing are not good enough. We need to restore services. But it's also true to say that we will not get to that restoration of services until we get a resolution between ScotRail and between Aslef, the drivers' union. And I'm committed to ensuring that we get to that place as quickly as possible to give passengers that reassurance they need to make sure that nationalisation is working.
Thank you, Minister. I'm sure we all agree that we need to see that dialogue happening.
And respectful tone as well.
We want it to be respectful. We want to see services restored.
Yeah.
But just my last question, because you've made a distinction between the Scottish Government and what happens elsewhere in the United Kingdom, and the Scottish Government is very committed to fair work, and I know you have a good relationship with the trade unions on that matter. You did mention rest days, and I think the public want services restored for the convenience of all of us, but we need that to be safe. So what is the position on rest days? I know you've said it's historic practice that happens elsewhere, but in your mind, is it good practice for workers to feel under pressure to work on rest days? No,
so I would agree with the sentiment of Ms Lennon's question. I don't think any worker should feel under pressure to work on their rest days. But I think I go back to, I think, my initial point to the convener. Rest day working is not something which suddenly occurred as of the 1st of April 2022. It has been in existence for a number of years. It's how our trains right across Great Britain, I have to say, not just in Scotland, operate. They depend upon drivers volunteering to work. on their rest days. Should it be phased out? I think it's a historic practice. I'm perfectly committed to work with the trade unions to have those future discussions as we move forward. However, it is a historic, it is something that has existed historically in terms of how train drivers work and they operate. And I think too, Bill will correct me if I'm wrong, that they are compensated for working on their rest days.
They are. Perhaps also worth adding that the level of rest day working that has been required of drivers recently has been complicated by absence due to COVID-related sickness, and also the fact that although 134 drivers are currently in training in ScotRail, their training programme has been delayed by restrictions. It takes about a year to train a driver, and their training programme has been delayed by restrictions caused by COVID. So a train cab is a confined space, so you can imagine there have been periods when putting a trainee alongside an experienced driver has just not been possible. So it's, there's a lot of work to recover that, but the last year or so has not helped.
I imagine we don't have much more time on this item, but I just wonder, ahead of the 1st of April, what advice was given to ministers on these issues? You know, did anyone foresee that this was going to happen, that, you know, services would be reduced by 1/3 just, you know, a month after we moved into public ownership?
No, I don't think anyone foresaw that this was going to happen a month after public ownership. As I outlined to you and the convener and the committee in March, I spent a lot of my time over February and March meeting with the trade unions, listening to them, making sure they were part of our vision going forward. I am still committed to working with them on a number of areas. So, for example, as we know, we've heard from the trade unions concerns around about their staff and their safety on our trains. There are concerns around about women's safety on our trains, concerns around about what the vision is for Scotland's train going forward. And I want trade unions to be part of that, to feel as though they are part of that. I'm quite clear they didn't feel as though they were part of that under the Abellio franchise. So, to answer your point, I think we need to get to a resolution. No, I don't think it was the case on April the 1st. We could have foreseen this. I think there were perhaps rumblings, but I worked very hard to build relationships with our trade unions. So I am quite disappointed by some of the most recent press reports we are hearing. But ultimately, we need to get to a resolution between ScotRail, the employer, and Aslef, the Train Drivers' Union, to allow for that restoration of services to come back. And that's what I'm committed to, working with both parties on to ensure that we get to that place.
Thank you very much. There are no more questions. The next agenda item is the